Welcome to The Business Strategist, the show for CEOs and founders ready to scale fast, lead smarter, and build a business that doesn't rely on them. I'm Adam Strong, award-winning strategist, former elite athlete, international speaker, and 3 times best-selling author. After 3 decades in business, I know exactly what it takes to grow, scale, and exit with impact. Each week, I dive into real conversations with industry experts, bold entrepreneurs, and clients navigating the uphill struggles of business, giving you the tools and the strategies to create more profit, more freedom, and more impact. Let's get into it. Hey guys, Adam Strong here, host of The Business Strategist. First of all, I wanted to welcome some of our listeners here on the show. If you're new to the show and you're enjoying some of our episodes, please make sure that you hit that follow and subscribe button on whatever channel that you're listening to today. I want to also welcome back some of our followers and subscribers. Thank you very much for your support. We really greatly appreciate it. Now, I would really love it if I could have some more feedback from you guys. So if you could leave either a 1 or a 5-star review over on Apple or Spotify, I would love to hear from you guys, because without the show, we don't know how to improve, right? So do me a favor, go over there and head over and leave a review for me. Or alternatively, feel free to head over to YouTube, over onto the channel, and feel free to leave a comment on our YouTube channel. Anyway, hope you're rocking and rolling. Enjoy today's episode. Cheers now. Every time your team brings you a problem and you solve it, you teach them one thing. I'll take care of everything. Then you wonder why you can't take the weekend off. So my guest today has spent her career researching why smart operators keep building their own prisons. She's the best-selling author of Leading Yourself. She also wrote a LinkedIn course, actually, which is called Leading Yourself, and has had over 2 million people download the course and take it. We have the amazing Elizabeth Lotado here on the show, and we have a lot of mutual contacts and connections in the leadership and management realm. So, Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam, and thanks for such a great introduction. I love the framing of build your own prisons. It's a little bit more transparent than what I usually say, but it's quite accurate.
It is pretty accurate, isn't it? Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to today's show. It's really interesting because, your background is that you're a researcher, aren't you? And in, I think it's organizational psychology, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
That's correct. I have a background in industrial and organizational psychology. I got my master's in that with a focus on employee engagement. And I'm currently a fellow at the Harvard Medical School Institute of Coaching, focused
Very
on
good.
consulting, executive coaching, all the nerdy ways to say, how do we make work less bad?
Excellent. I love that. I think we've got an expert in the house. So before we kind of get into the juicy stuff, I'd love to kind of know a little bit more, especially our listener. I'd love to know more about before the research, before the book. What was the catalyst? What pulled you into this fascination of operator leadership kind of blockages, if you want to call it that? I'd love to know more about that.
Well, there wasn't a big clouds parting moment like there are for a lot of researchers, right? So I can't tell you this amazing story about how I was 5 and I always wanted to study why people spend so much time on the phone. It wasn't like that for me.
Right.
So I started my career in communications. I worked at an ad agency and I had a really bad experience at work. I burned out really quickly. I felt the work was very transactional. And so, like most, mid 20 somethings in emotional crisis, I went to grad school to study organizational psychology and sort of unpack why my experience was not what I wanted it to be and why so many of my friends had that same experience. And in that research, with a focus on employee engagement, I started to extrapolate out some skills that enabled people to engage themselves, to make the most of a bad situation, skills that I didn't innately have, but I was fascinated by them because they seemed really important. And that bedrock of skills became the base for my LinkedIn Learning course and then my book, Leading Yourself. How do you, as an individual, chart your own path, regardless of what's going on around you? And as I started to get traction with Leading Yourself in 2018, 2019, when it really started to take off in numbers, I was being called into organizations to speak about the power of self leadership and constantly hearing from leaders. I want my team to step up, I want them to really own it. And I thought, okay, cool, perfect. Like I can teach that. I know all the skills to do that. And then as I started to get deeper, I realized there was this hidden underbelly of the problem. And that was an operator that was enabling dependency. So the very person who hired me, who said, I want my team to own their own problems, was the same person who was picking up all those problems the second they got a little bit loud. The same person who brought me in and said, I want my team to feel empowered, was the same person that would step in the second there was a challenge. And I saw this dynamic play out on how desperately operators wanted true partners in their business, how they wanted their teams to feel empowered and self led. But they kept sort of shooting their own foot, to use a very American expression, in the execution of that and getting in the way of the self leadership skills they were hoping to see in their team. So that's what took me down the leadership path and ultimately studying why operators build their own prisons, to reflect your words back.
You're going to remember that one.
I am.
It sounds very contradictory. Now, the first thing that kind of springs to my mind, and it's really interesting because you've studied organizational psychology, and now I have a real big fascination in psychology myself. And one of the questions often comes up in my mind is really questioning why we do what we do, right? Whether based on certain behaviors, certain actions, or whatever it might be. What are some of the common beliefs that a founder or a CEO tends to tell themselves? Whether it be around excuses or certain reasoning as to why they act or they believe in a certain way based on the topic of what we're talking about today.
So I'll zoom in on what beliefs are sort of driving the behavior to oversolve, right? Is that the basis of your question? To jump in, to take it all on, to not
Yep.
leave space. To me, there are three beliefs driving that behavior, and they're all well intended. The first is usually the leader cares a lot. They're usually a founder. They care deeply about the future of the business. They are more exposed than their employees, typically financially, if they are a founder. So the first is just they care a lot. The second is they don't want their teams to have bad experiences. Again, this is a well intended belief. They don't want their team to feel frustrated. They don't want their team to feel under supported. They don't want their team carrying the weight of this. So they step in. And the third is still well intended, but it's borderline, which is no one can solve it better than me. And the unfortunate part of that is it's often true. The reckoning that a founder particularly has to make, that an operator has to make, is the trade-off worth it in the long term?
It's really interesting, those three belief systems, because I think you're right. I think that again, we're all wired in slightly different ways. Like we've all got different personalities. We've all got different leadership styles in the way that we want to build our companies, whether it be small company, big company, whatever it might be. And it's really interesting. I mean, we just really briefly touched on it, which is like, what's the detrimental effects, the knock-on effects to those three pillars or those three verticals? I'd love to talk about that because there must be quite a few.
Of course, and I started that umbrella statement with this is a well-intended mentality, right? Someone who is really emotionally invested and cares a lot, someone who doesn't want their team to suffer, and someone who believes to some degree accurately that they are the fastest, easiest person to solve the problem.
Yeah.
I think the consequence of that belief is not immediate, and that's why it happens. Because if I am your boss, right? And I'm this operator, I'm a go-getter, I know this business inside and out and it's mine, and I take a problem from you, in the short term, we probably both feel better. I feel like the business is protected. I feel like I made you happy because now you don't have a big, hairy problem to deal with. And I feel like this got solved quickly. You feel good too because you feel like, oh, Elizabeth, she's such a nice boss. She took this big, hairy problem off my plate. So supportive. But in the long term, the summation of that, the compound of that dynamic is really detrimental because in the long term, as a founder, I'm going to burn out. I'm going to feel alone. I'm going to feel like I can't scale. And you, as my employee, while you don't have big, hairy problems to deal with, you're going to feel like you're not empowered, like you're not valued, like you can't do anything around here, like your career's not developing in the way you want it to, which is the long-term price. And again, in the immediate term, we feel neutral or even good, both of us in this dynamic. But in the long term, we're both going to feel bad.
I want to pick up the third one, which is no one can do it better than anybody else. And it honestly, it's such a common belief system. The other two, not so much, but I do believe that they do exist. But often when you read about leadership pieces or pieces of content, often it stems back to no one can do it better than I can, right? Which is, I guess it can be seen as negative. It's more seen as negative, whereas the other two are kind of more seen as, well, it's seen more as positive. Do you see what I mean? And I guess in a way it's kind of like, negativity kind of grabs the headlines type of thing. Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean. And I said when I went through the three that third one is a little bit gray area. What I think gets twisted in that narrative is all these operators, all these founders saying no one can solve this problem better than me. And the traditional leadership pushback is that's not true. But in my opinion, they're probably right. No one can solve the problem faster and as good as you.
Yeah.
But the price to continually solving might be steeper than the disconnect there.
I cannot tell you how many conversations that I've had with really, they look successful on paper, really successful founders. And a really good example of this is a legal firm actually in London. They have a 7-figure business. Love the founder. Like, we have really good energy together and stuff like that. But literally she flies around like a blue ass fly and literally does everything. And the thing is that what's really interesting about that is that the team members, they'll approach me and they know straight away, like, she does everything. And I'm kind of like thinking to myself that they seem content about it. And it's like, well, but you're not getting it. It's like, you're content, you're happy with that. But when does it get to a point when you're not happy with it?
It absolutely makes sense. And I obviously haven't met the founder or the team you're talking to, but generally the research tells us it's correlative to performance and ambition. Low performers and people who are not ambitious are quite content to have someone run around solving their own problems.
Yeah.
High performers who are driven in their careers, less so, or at least they have a shorter window of time they're willing to tolerate on it without pushback.
And it's really interesting. And she has a really highly motivated team and everything like that. But I guess they'll get to a point, like you said, the long-term detrimental effects further on down the line is probably going to have a knock-on to performance, motivation, intrinsic motivation, and things like that, I guess, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you constantly have a boss running around solving your problems, the boss is always the one coming up with the ideas, the boss is always the one doing it perfectly. Why would you attempt to do it at 95%, right? That's just exposure.
Exactly. 100%. What does, I mean, your background in as a researcher, like, what does the science say about the operator's mindset? Is it a behavior change problem? Is it a lack of intelligence? Is it a mindset blockage? What have you discovered as part of that?
Behavior is part of it, mindset is part of it. I won't say it's lack of intelligence, potentially lack of awareness is probably as gnarly of an insult I would give to that. The research behind this mentality is usually correlated to the research of a high performer. And there was a really famous book from Marshall Goldsmith, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, right? And some of
Classic.
that is connected to the very dynamic we're discussing. What got a founder to have a firm, to have a team, to have revenue is the very behavior that often holds them back from scaling. The tendency to oversolve, the tendency to get in front of the problem, the tendency to be always on, willing to do whatever it takes. That very behavior that got them to the place where they are is often what holds them back from building a business that scales without their ever involvement.
So you mentioned around the lack of self-awareness. What are some of the things that if we have a listener here that's nodding their head thinking, yeah, that's me. I'm a high performer. I'm a
Plus 10 for
doer.
you.
What do you do, like, from a practical exercise perspective with these high performers? Like, how do you shift that mindset? Where does it begin? Like, what's the journey? What's the breakdown? What's the framework?
So if you're listening to this and you think, that might be me, right? I might be oversolving. I might be
Right.
stepping over my team to a degree that's not being helpful. The first step is to give yourself some behavioral evidence because what we're talking about in terms of a mindset shift is not easy. You've built your whole career on being a high performer, someone who gets out in front of problems and someone who gets these things done. So you're going to have a lot of evidence to shift your
Mhm.
behavior, right?
Yeah.
And the best form of evidence that you can give is when someone comes to you with a problem, right? Your employee, they come to you in a one on one, they flag you down right when you get to the office, and they tell you all about it, and you say nothing. Under the surface, where does the problem lie? Does it lie with you or does it lie with them? And pay attention to their energy when they're telling you this, right? Are they filling you in which case, that's just what a good employee does? Or are they subtly passing the problem to you? And at the end of that conversation, who is the expected owner of the problem? And just make a study for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months of yourself, your interactions, and where the problems end up. And if they are always assumptively landing on you, you have enough data at your back to sustain yourself in the behavior change.
Okay, good. So evidence is always a good idea because then it kind of dictates rationale, doesn't it?
Right, because you're trying to overwire a tendency that made you successful up until now, right? So we can't do this based on one podcast episode. You're going to have some personal data points.
Agreed. Okay, is there any other steps?
I think getting a handle on that is the first step and an easy layup that I wrote about in an HBR piece. If you want to start shifting responsibility back to your team, is
Mhm.
to ask, what have you tried? This is a foundational coaching question. Michael Buggy Sider wrote about it in his book. That what have you tried question does a couple of things. First, it serves as did they actually try something? The answer might surprise you either way. They may have tried 3 things and none of them worked, and there's more
Mhm.
ownership than you thought. Or they might have not tried anything and thought, well, this is a problem, so I brought it to you. What do you mean? What did I try? So that question tells you where on the spectrum your team is at present in terms of ownership and self initiative. The second thing it does is over time builds the expectation that they should try something. Even if the first couple of answers are
Mhm.
nothing yet, like kind of surprised by that question, if you continue to ask, what have you tried? Over time, tries will be had before the issue comes to you. And even if they're not successful, that is a shift in the right direction in terms of passing some ownership and some initiative onto your team.
Mm. Because I know that I think I read a piece on your LinkedIn profile. I think there were 5 questions, wasn't there? If I
There
remember
are.
rightly. Is that correct?
There are. That's number one.
Okay, let's do the other 4.
Okay, so the other 4 questions, let's go to number 2. What or who is getting in the way of tackling this? If your
Okay.
employee comes to you with a problem that they've been unable to solve by themselves, they need to at least be able to articulate why. Maybe it's a budget constraint. Maybe it's, well, this department never signs off on anything. Maybe it's, I'm too nervous to call this client by myself and you're going to be better at it. Get to the root of what is holding back the solve to reverse that dynamic a little bit. And that question, who or what is getting in the way of you solving this, is again conveying that subtle message of expectation. This is yours to solve.
I love that. Some good stuff. All right.
Right?
Absolutely, I'm ready. Sorry,
All right.
I make notes, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, I should have told you guys this at the very beginning. Make sure you got your notebook and pen handy because honestly, what we're delivering is a masterclass.
I
And
can
if
send you the article link, Adam. Maybe we can put it in the show notes. So
we'll put
people
that in
don't
the
have
show
to get
notes.
out their
Don't worry.
pen and ink.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, go ahead. Number 3.
All right, question 3. What would you do if you were in my seat? The reason I love this
Mm.
question is it builds problem solving skills over time and it makes some appreciation, come to the fore for the problem solver. I'll tell you a dynamic I see so often inside of my clients is the leader takes on the problem, right? There's this big, hairy customer issue, for example, and they stay late. They look at all angles of the problem. They research the problem. They think about potential solves to the problem. They call the customer and they eventually solve the problem. And their team witnessed none of that, right? Their team just sent their problem into the magical void of the leader's office where it always gets solved, and who knows how and who knows to what degree of effort, but it always comes out solved. So this question of what would you do if you were in my seat makes problem solving visible. It prompts employees to think through some of the trade offs, to realize how much work it's going to take to solve this problem, and to, over time, replicate that thinking independently. So
Yeah.
that question invites them in instead of letting the transfer happen in kind of like a let me dump this on your desk format.
I love that. It's kind of like, taking this and then giving it to somebody else and getting them to think about it. Taking this, it's like this trade of ownership to somebody else.
And even if they're not solving it, even if they don't know what they would do if they were in your seat, it makes problem solving visible in a way that it is often not when the default is to dump the problem on the leader's desk.
Yep. I love that. Some good stuff. Very good one. All right. Number 4.
What support do you need? I'll tell
Mhm.
you, this is very different than the well-intended leader question of how can I support you, or what support do you need from me? What this question does is open up the potential avenues of support. Instead of just me, your leader, helping you, do you need some professional development in this area? Do you need money to solve this problem? Do you need the help of another department? Would they be better at solving this problem than I would be as the leader? That question, what supports you need, puts the onus on the employee to identify the support that's lacking, and it widens the aperture beyond the leader being the sole support, which is so often the trap in founder-led businesses.
I love that. It's a really good perspective. And I love the way that you've reframed the question with regards to what's, and one thing that I've noticed here is they're all open-ended questions.
There's no yes or no in there. There's really nowhere to hide. You have to think.
All right, cool. What's number 5?
Well, I just kind of shot myself in the foot with there's no because number 5, the fifth question that I coach leaders on is there anything else I should know?
Yeah.
And the reason this is last is because in absence of the other 4, if you are in this pattern of being the problem solver, if it is assumed you will take up the big hairy thing and solve it in a vacuum and no one has to deal with the consequences, asking, is there anything else I should know? It's still expected that you're going to solve it, right? If you ask that question alone, it's not quite enough to shift the dynamic. But if you ask that question last, that's why it's number 5, or if you ask that question after a few months of what have you tried, what's getting in the way, what support do you need, that question can differentiate between, is this employee bringing me a problem to solve, or are they just making sure I'm in the loop and I'm not blindsided by it? And oftentimes, leaders who fall victim to this oversolving behavior, they miss the times that their employees didn't actually want them to solve the problem. They just didn't want them to be surprised. So that question can help you differentiate between what really is asking for your involvement versus what's keeping you informed.
Love it. Some good stuff there. I had a thought actually around this whole kind of this mindset of I want to do I want to do it because it's quicker and easier to do it myself. This element of control. And my thought was, is it because I actually don't want to lose control, or the fear of losing control, or is it the fact that I'm actually addicted to not having that control? And I'm sure that you probably studied the two in terms, if it is an addiction of not being able to let go or whatever it might be. But I'm trying to differentiate if it is a fear or if it's an addiction.
I would say it's probably both. And in every addiction, there's an undercurrent of fear. In every fear, there's an undercurrent of addiction, right? If you're addicted to
Mhm.
keeping control, the fear is that I'm going to lose it. If you're
Yeah.
afraid you're going to lose control, the overcompensating behavior is to maintain all control. So I think those two are closely connected. And
Mm.
addiction is a loaded word. And I think, like I said, a lot of these people who fall victim to this behavior trap, they have the best of intentions. They want to build a successful business. They want to build a team that feels empowered and supported and capable of solving problems. And too much of a good thing lands us in this tricky dynamic. So some of both, and I think it's an important question. And if you're listening and you're sitting with that question, you're feeling a little bit unease, you might have a dash of one side of that or both.
When I think of the word addiction, it can come across like the assumption can come across as quite kind of negative, right? Because if you're addicted to something, it's generally not seen as healthy
Right.
if you do something of too much of. And then when we think about fear, we don't want, as leaders, we don't want it to be judgmental. I guess it depends on the different perspective. Does that make sense?
It does, and we're getting into kind of a hairy psyche assessment, but
Yeah.
beneath all of this, to me, are a couple of driving factors, and it goes back to those 3 things that we talked about in the beginning, and they
Yeah.
inform this fear and addiction element of it too, right?
Mm.
The desire to build a business that is great, the desire to have people supported, empowered, and the recognition that in a lot of cases, in the near term, you are the best solve.
Mm.
And to not dismiss that opens the door to actual long-term behavior change. But so often it's like, "Oh, they could solve it just as well." That's probably not true, to be honest. Most founders are exceptional solvers. They know the business better than anyone and they care more, but it's not sustainable for anybody.
Yeah, I agree. For one thing that I have observed, especially operator-led businesses that have been around for, I don't know, 20, 25 years, they're all stuck in their ways. And I'm sure that you've come across, they know that there is a problem and and it's so difficult for them to change. How do you help someone that is so stuck in their ways? And in a way, they again, it's kind of going back to this belief system of why should I change? There's this chicken and egg situation where they know that if they do change something, there's going to be a positive, but then the counteract to that is I want to resort back to my comfort zone. For those that are listening that have got that established business, they've been in that operator mindset for such a long period of time, and they're trying to break the cycle because it's tough for them. Like they've been
Yes.
in it for so long. Um,
Yeah, and the longer you're in it, the more your employees feed into it, right? There's a cycle with them involved too. It's not just you. So you're having to retrain yourself and you're having to retrain your employees too subconsciously because they don't know you're getting an executive coach or listening to a podcast or whatever you're doing. So I have kind of a contrarian approach to this in my executive coaching clients. And what I ask people to do, because I wrestle with this a lot, an overfunctioning founder, an overfunctioning operator who's tired of people not picking up the ball, is I ask them to chart out the worst case scenario
oh,
for
I like
letting
that.
a few things go. And I ask them to chart out the worst case scenario for continuing to solve everyone else's problems. And what founders often find and operators often find is in the near term, they're about even. The worst case scenario for letting people solve problems is they make some mistakes, a few things slip, there's some deadline misses, and you lose a client. The worst case scenario in the near term for continuing to solve is, well, I'm still going to be tired. I can't go on vacation, but I've survived up until now. So, who's to say? So it's a wash. And that's why behavior change doesn't stick. But when you push it to the long term and we say, okay, let's play this out. That's what happens in 3 months. What happens in 3 years? If this dynamic continues. I can give you some general principles. High performers will not be staying on your team. High performers don't want to work for a leader who constantly oversolves. They want space, they want to be empowered, they want to learn and grow, even at the expense of some misses. So you'll lose all your high performers and you won't be able to attract more either. On your side, you will be 3 years deeper into perpetual burnout and loneliness with a less capable team than you have now. Is that incentive enough to change behavior? And usually in the long term, it is. The reason we don't is that long term picture isn't clear enough in most cases.
I'm going to push back on something here, and it's really interesting. So I remember this conversation about probably going back about 3 years ago. I met a founder of an IT company, and he'd been doing his business for like 20 years, right? So a really nice chap, family man, and all that kind of stuff. And we just had this open conversation, and I just basically said, so when are you exiting your business type thing, right? Oh, I can't exit my business. I went, why is that? He said to me, Elizabeth, he said, because I don't trust anyone else. I went, what do you mean you don't trust anybody else? He said, yeah, because no one's going to work harder than me. No one knows better than business than me. That I don't trust it. And I'm like, well, if you carry around with that belief system, of course it must be true. And it was just really interesting here, going back to what you said. I know for a fact that there will be listeners here that have that belief system.
Yeah.
What do you say to people like that?
You're probably right. No one's going to want it more. No one's going to work harder, and no one's going to care as much as you do.
Yeah. And
right.
I guess there's no way around it, because there's no point in trying to change someone if they don't want to change, right?
Right. You're right. I wouldn't push back on that at all. That's true.
Yeah.
What I would suggest is that with the right coaching and the right behavior change from you as a leader, you could get a good team to 90%. And what would that do for you?
I love that, because there are some really interesting founders out there and they've got wonderful businesses, but my God, you just kind of step back and again, it's not like I'm there to judge people, but I kind of think to myself, like, I don't quite, you want something, whether it be, they want to achieve something big or they want to make an impact, yet they're contradictory in their actions. Do you see what I mean?
Kind of. And that's one of the reasons I'm reluctant to push back on a founder who says, well, no one's going to care about this as much as I do. Duh. You started the business. You put yourself on the line. You had everything to lose. Like, of course, no one's going to care about this as much as you do.
Yep.
And to wait until someone does before you take a vacation, you're never going to take a vacation.
Exactly.
But again, to the suggestion of you can get a good group of people to care a lot, and that is more scalable and more sustainable.
When does that, like, what does ownership and accountability look like to the small business owner? Like, what if someone has been an owner operator mindset, for such a long period of time, they are now ready to change? How do you kind of like guide people in terms of setting up certain ownership protocols down the line?
So I'll tell you, I keynote most on my book, Leading Yourself, for an employee-based audience, not necessarily a founder-operator-based audience. This conversation we're having about how founders kind of sabotage that as the behind the curtain, like, hey, I just hyped your team up to be empowered. Like, don't blow it. That's an executive coaching piece. But empowerment and accountability, it touches both sides of those. And I'll use your word ownership. One of my clients told me I was like the extreme ownership guy, but way nicer and more encouraging. And I felt like that was such a great summation of my work, because I do believe in self leadership at all levels and being accountable to yourself, no matter if your behavior changes small, like coming prepared to your one on ones, or if your behavior changes big, like trying to get over some of these oversolving tendencies that happen at the highest level of leadership. And wherever you are on that spectrum, whatever level you are in the organization, whatever scale your behavior change, your targeted behavior change is, it comes down to clear, trackable steps. If you say, well, I'm going to stop solving my team's problems for them, that podcast really landed with me and I'm going to stop it, you're not going to be successful. If you say, I am going to say, what have you tried? Every single time someone brings me a problem. And I'm going to keep a check mark, a list of how many times I ask that question. And if I don't ask it at least 20 times a week, I'm failing, because I know more than 20 problems are brought to me every week. And that is going to be the accountability metric I hold myself to. We have to extrapolate these mindset shifts, these leadership principles, this sort of big, hairy, emotional mess into trackable behaviors. Because only when we fall short on something like a clear metric where there's nowhere to hide, like you kind of did or you didn't do it, there's not, I tried, well, I did it a little. That's when you can really, to use your words, have ownership and hold yourself accountable. It's much more effective in driving behavior change.
With regards to the trackable results that you're talking about, what does that look like? Is that like you get people to write a worksheet or something like that? What does that look like in principle?
I think that really depends on how each leader works. Like whether you have a worksheet, whether you're a digital native, whatever system you are using to track the other metrics that are crucially important to your business, whatever dashboard you're working with, whether it's a stack of Excel sheets every Friday, whether you're into wherever you're getting your bar on am I being successful here, add to that. We're not going to come up with a new system. I'm not going to make you carry around a worksheet if you're always on your phone.
I wanted to kind of give you a bit of a heads up because you know that I love doing the coaching part of the session, right?
I gave away all my questions.
Yeah, I know, right? But actually, I just had some really great thought processes. So, for you guys that are listening in, if you're a new listener, what we do in the last third of the session is we go into coaching mode. That means Elizabeth's going to coach me, right? I'm the student, she's the teacher. Great. So, based on today's topic, of course. And I want you to imagine that she is sitting on a sofa next to you. I want you to imagine that she's coaching you right now. But more importantly, I want you to think about not just what she's saying. I want you to really think about how you can challenge certain belief systems that you have yourself and how it can apply to you. So
the scene is set.
Absolutely. But let me give you some context here because for many years, I have been an owner-operator business, as most management consultants generally are. And there are certain belief systems that I have, and we have touched on a couple of them today, but I feel very personal about them. My belief is that I think that's probably the reason why most companies, including myself, plateau. You know, a business only plateaus because of the person that steers the ship type of thing works in a particular way. I think there's strong correlations to that. Now, I don't really have the fear of judgment embedded into my DNA, but I do have a couple of beliefs that I feel like probably needs to be challenged. So I'd like you to challenge them. The first challenge and the belief system that I have is it's quicker and easier to do it all myself. You know, no one can do it better than me. And believe it or not, I still have that belief system a lot of the times.
Well, first of all, I'll say you're probably the most self-aware executive coaching client I've ever had.
I thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I have these core sets of beliefs and I need you to challenge me. We're skipped a few months with that level.
We did.
So let's get into core belief number 1. No one can do it as good as you, right? As good, as fast, whatever it is.
Yep.
You're probably right.
Okay.
Why do you want to change?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I remember, by the way, I haven't mentioned this. Me and Marshall Goldsmith did a coaching. This was going a couple of years back. And it was really interesting. It was entertaining because he knows that my background is in elite athletics, right? So elite sport. And his thing was all around, oh, but Adam you can do it better than anybody else. Can you, Adam? No, you can, Adam, and things like that. And there was this kind of egotistical point of me that I never even knew that I had, but clearly I do. What do I want to change? I want to be able to, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to be able to trust myself, and I want to be able to make sure that the decisions that I make is not just good for the business, but it's good all round.
If you want to be able to trust yourself, where do you feel like that lack of trust is showing up? Do you feel like you're not making good decisions, you're making too many decisions? I'm sensing there's 2 different problems here, right? You don't trust anyone else to make decisions, but you also just said you don't trust yourself.
Well, I think I feel like I have this sense of responsibility.
Okay.
And the responsibility, obviously, when you built a business for many years and you've tried and tested a lot of things, you go through this experimentation and things like that. This kind of burden of responsibility, if you want to call it that, because it's like a burden you carry around. I feel like I'd like to be able to delegate some of that burden or that responsibility to somebody else. I just don't know how.
Okay. So you don't trust yourself to delegate effectively, and you don't trust the other party to pick up whatever you've delegated. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's a good description. Yes.
When you say you have a burden of responsibility to who?
Very good question. Responsibility to my clients,
Okay.
responsibility to not just my clients, but yeah, I suppose it's my clients is the main one.
Not your employees.
Not so much. I would say my clients more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to set our scene, you feel a huge amount of responsibility to your clients. You don't trust yourself enough to delegate the right things, and you don't trust the people you're delegating them to. Is that fair to say on balance?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I don't have any trust in my team. That's not what I'm saying. I'd say that it's limited,
Okay.
but it
We
but
can
it
work
could be but it could be better,
it
right?
could be better. Well, based on what you said, I think the trust in you can be better too. So we're going to work on parallel tracks.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. What happens if things keep staying the way they are? Do you feel like you're not fulfilling your burden of responsibility to your clients? Who's suffering? What's the incentive to change?
I think if it stays the same, then nothing changes. That's obviously, that's obvious. But
What's wrong with that?
well, the thing is, I have these kind of epiphany moments where I kind of feel like, and it's interesting. Every few years, Elizabeth, I go through these, I don't know, self-reflective episodes in my life where I think to myself, is this all life can give me? Like, how can I make it massive change, massive improvement? And I really have to get out of my comfort zone to do that. So I think in answer to your question is I'd like to become more, I'd like to be more, but I'd like to have a bigger impact further down the line.
Okay, so there is something at stake. The
Yeah.
reason I ask is keeping on is a perfectly fine path for a lot of people. But if
Mm.
there is something at stake and you want to scale, we're going to have to overcome two things based on what I'm hearing. We're going to have to overcome the doubt you have in yourself on your ability to pick and choose what to delegate. And we're going to have to overcome your generous framing, little bit of doubt you have in your team to be able to pick up the ball and execute it well. What I will push back on is where we started in this conversation of no one's gonna do it as fast and as good as me. That's accurate. No one's gonna do it as fast and as good as you, especially at first. So we're gonna have to work with a little bit of runway and have some tolerance for growing pains if we want this dynamic to change and to get to that place of making a bigger impact that you see and that you feel called to. Fair?
Sounds good.
So the first experiment we're gonna do is this. Over the next week, I'm going to ask you to keep a little mental not a mental tally, a physical tally. You can keep it in your phone, you can keep it on your computer, you can keep it on a sticky note, wherever you can take notes of how many times people bring you a problem. And by problem, I mean a client issue, a logistics issue, a billing issue, a money problem. How many times are you delivered a problem? Do you have a
Interesting.
prediction before we get started?
I think it's good. It's probably quite high actually.
It's usually over 100 for leaders in your seat.
Ooh, wow. I mean, in a week,
It's
I
only
wouldn't.
20 a day. You're down to 2 or 3 an hour. I think that's a fair assessment.
I think it depends on how busy we are, but I mean, to me, it feels like a lot.
It feels like a lot. It
Yeah,
probably is a lot. And I'll tell you the reason I'm asking you to keep track of these things,
yeah.
because I know it's a lot just based on this conversation.
Okay.
And we need to have a metric of success for this. It can't be, I feel a little better. It can't be, I'm a little more trusting. We need to get that number over the course of this engagement down. We're going to try
Mhm.
and cut it by at least a third, hopefully half, because that metric will be evidence of two things. It will be evidence that you are trusting yourself enough to delegate problems, and it will be evidence that your team is capable of picking them up and sustaining that behavior change. And if that number isn't changing over the course of a couple of months, we know we have a different problem than we thought. Fair?
Sounds good. I guess my thought that came to my mind was, okay, that sounds wonderful. My only doubt would be is that is it would be in my team because I've been taking the big responsibility on for a long period of time. My doubt would be is, do they want to take the burden? I guess the only way to answer that question is ask them, right?
I would caution you against asking them directly.
I was going to
You're
say.
gonna make a conclusion based on behavior change. And that's
Okay.
one of the reasons why I really think this metric tracking exercise is an important one.
Mhm.
Because if you do your part and this number doesn't move, it means we might have a team problem. And to your point, they might not be the right team to step up to take ownership. Maybe there's
Mm.
some work we need to do there. Haven't met your team? I don't know. But this number is going to give us a good starting point in terms of a baseline. And if we see that number starting to move, it is evidence of two things: that you are letting go of some things and that your team is, in fact, picking up the ball and running with it. Asking someone, do you want to take ownership? First of all, everyone's going to say yes because no one wants to be the person that tells their
Mm.
boss, no, I don't want any ownership, especially in this economy. But based on what you've described in the pattern of behavior, they don't really know what that looks like yet. So we need
Makes
to work
sense.
on your part in defining what ownership looks like and what problems can be best solved at the teammate level versus brought to you.
Mhm.
But the only way we're going to know where we're starting with is to get a handle on what the volume is.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So that's a really good exercise. I think that's for you guys that are listening in. By the way, that's an excellent exercise to start. The last thought process that came to my mind is once I've got the metrics, once I've collected some data based on what you just said, I guess then my next question would be is, okay, well, if I'm not directly approaching them and saying, hey guys, I need some support, and I guess I then need to evaluate if the people in my team are in a position where they can either support me or not support me. And I guess that will then be because people get stuck in their ways, don't they? We're human beings. We're kind of creatures of habit type of thing, you know? So, yeah, I guess that would be my question would be is what would be after we've collected the data, how do I then evaluate if those are the right people?
So we're going to have our number at the front end, how many problems are being dumped on your desk. And that
Yep.
is our number we're trying to get down.
Yep.
And then we will move into subtly pushing back on some of this problem dumping. And we're going to collect data based on how your team responds. So you're going to use this series of 5 questions that we just talked about in this podcast
Yep.
episode to kind of break
Very
the
good.
third wall a little bit, fourth wall. And we're going to let your people tell us in how they respond to those questions. And it's not
Mhm.
going to be an overnight shift because we're going to give people credit. They've been working to you for a long time. They want to
Yeah.
please you. They know your default norms. This behavior change takes time.
Yep.
But if you diligently deploy these 5 questions and you see after 90 days no evidence of behavior change, then we might have a team problem. But we're not going to jump there yet.
Cool. Sounds good. That is a really useful exercise, not just for myself, but also for a lot of our listeners, especially if they want to get out of the operator trap, if you want to call it that. So thank you so much, first of all. I really appreciate that.
A nice, very mini coaching session. I'll tell you what I find when I ask leaders to do this exercise
Yeah.
is number one, they're usually stunned by the volume. They had a gnawing feeling that they were getting a lot of problems dumped on them, a lot of
Mm.
small granular things that shouldn't necessarily be dumped on their desk, and they're usually stunned to see the volume. The
Mm.
other thing that happens is through the course of the exercise, you are kind of forced to assess your own response. Once you mentally are like, problem dumping, there it is, there's the problem dumping, you subconsciously pay attention to, okay, how am I receiving this in a way that you don't when you're default in the course of business? So it has a couple of parts. The tracking is definitely really helpful. It gives you a bar of coaching success. I don't want to leave someone with no significant improvement. But the second thing it does in a mindset shift is really gets a leader thinking about, okay, all this is clearly happening. I have the numbers to prove it. And what's my part in this? How am I receiving this 100, 200 problems that come to me on a day to day basis?
It's really fascinating about what we've talked about in terms of the exercise that you set. What's so surprised to me is that a simple exercise like that could actually unlock many different business owners that's listening to this episode and go help them to go from where they're at right now to something which is more scalable.
It definitely. And what we've talked about here in a variety of different ways is this is a challenging behavior change. It is
Mm.
rewiring the very behavior that made you successful. And
Mm.
that is going to be an impossibility without some concrete data at your back. And the act of tracking this is often incentive enough to push through the discomfort of change because you're confronted with the brutal reality that in 1 week you got 375 problems landed on your desk. And
Yeah.
intellectually, it's not scalable. But without tracking it, it just feels like, work feels bad. Why can't I go on vacation?
Or why do I need to take my laptop on vacation?
Yeah, and why can't I go to the bathroom without my phone? Jeez. You gotta put some numbers to it.
Love that. I'm curious, like, what's next for you? I mean, you've got your book out. You've done some keynotes and things like that. Like, what's the next big thing for you?
Good question, and TBD, to be honest. I mean, I had a book come out in 2024.
Yeah.
I wrote a great wave on leading yourself. I'm still writing that wave. I'm keynoting on leading yourself, leading without formal authority, all workplace topics, and doing some executive coaching, mostly on this dynamic of leaders who tend to oversolve problems for their team. Um, but I don't know what's next for me in a
Mm.
phase where I'm gonna let the universe tell me. I have some ideas, but none I'm gonna yap about on a podcast yet.
Okay, that's interesting. By the way, we want to give a big shout out to Lisa McLeod, who introduced
Yeah.
us. Hey, Lisa. And yeah, and you guys are business partners, right?
Yeah, so Lisa and I have worked together for a long time. We co-wrote several years ago a book called Selling with Noble Purpose together,
Mhm.
which brings her background of sales and scaling sort of the commercial sector of a business together with my background, which is employee engagement, culture, and scalable workplaces. So that was a really fun collaboration. But we had a great run with that book, and it's still very popular.
It is, absolutely. Elizabeth, just want to say thanks so much for jamming with me, and we've had some good fun, right?
Good stuff. Well, thanks for hanging out with me, getting into the nerd stuff, diving into the weeds. I hope your listeners found some insightful coaching questions or at least feel a little bit more seen in their well intended tendency to oversolve.
Absolutely. Do me a favor, go make sure you go connect with Elizabeth over on LinkedIn. Make sure you go check that out. And also go check out her book, Leading Yourself as well, which is you can go pick it up in Barnes& and Noble or Amazon or whatever it is your good bookstore in your jurisdiction. Thanks so much for again. And from me and Elizabeth today, hope you enjoyed today's episode and we'll speak to you soon. Cheers now. Bye.